I grew up in Kentucky in a small rural community just outside of Louisville, or Louisville as we said. So this time of year, all of our extracurricular activities, our thoughts, the things we talked about, were very much colored by the impending Kentucky Derby. And even as children, we would place our wagers on which horse was going to win. And while most of us probably had no clue about the actual abilities of the horses, we knew which ones had the names that we liked the best. And so we would, choose our horses based on who had the best name. And I know the racing industry has taken some heat in recent years, and probably rightfully so. It's still very much a part of the culture that I grew up in. And so that is why I chose the book that I chose for this week, Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I have been wanting to read this book for some time now, but I chose to wait until now to read it, with the Kentucky Derby just around the corner. Horse is the story of a thoroughbred named after Lexington, the city in which he was born. And while the author states that much of the book is a work of the imagination, pretty much most of the details about Lexington, his racing career, his years as a stud sire, are actually accurate. He was one of the fastest racehorses in history and sired many champion foals as well. As one of the characters in the book states, she's a researcher of horses who comes along later, states, we're not just talking about a horse here, we're talking about the horse. She said, what you have here is the greatest racing stallion in American history. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, because what I haven't told you is that the book actually covers probably 3 time periods, and it is about much more than a horse. The first time period covers about 1850 to about 1875, basically Lexington's lifetime. And yes, he was an extraordinary horse, but he had an extraordinary groom. Jarrett, his groom, was with him at his birth and was also with him at his death, and pretty much everything in between, and the two of them had a remarkable bond. Jarrett, who is not much more than a child when the story begins, was born into slavery, a black man, and he was highly valued for his skills, for his gifts when it came to horses, and particularly race horses. And we are privy to his thoughts as he navigates this world that is both loving and cruel. The reader gets to walk with him through and see into his mind as he navigates this world where he goes through, different owners in the course of this book. And he goes through the Civil War and just the precarious nature of loving a horse that he doesn't own and has limited say-so in what happens to the horse, and particularly when he knows something is bad for the horse or good for the horse, and he may or may not be listened to. We also get to walk with him through his growing friendship, for lack of a better word, with Thomas J. Scott, who was an equestrian artist, specifically did paintings of racehorses. One of the first conversations that they have, which is in probably the first 10th of the book, is one of my favorite dialogues in the book. It was their first time meeting, and they were standing out at a fence looking out at a horse in the pasture named Glacier, and Scott said, "What's he like?" referring to the horse. And Jarrett, just a kid, basically knew that it was better to say as few words as possible, because words could be snares. Words could get you in trouble. So he basically just said, "Collected at the post, fast off at the start." That's all he said. Well, Scott wasn't going to let him get away with that. He was like, "No, I mean, what is he like? Does he have a busy mind, or is he a dreamer? Is he bossy, or is he well-mannered? I want to know how he feels about the world. What is he like? What kind of a soul has he got?" Now, Jarrett had never heard of horses spoken about in this way, but he would come to learn that this is one of the things that made Scott such a remarkable artist, and that is that he was really able to capture the essence of the horse. So Jarrett, and I'll read this part to you, Jarrett tried for the first time to put his thoughts into words. Glacier, well, he be a fly one, he said. Fly, what does that mean? Asked Scott. We don't have that expression where I'm from back east. Jarrett tried to think how to explain it. Fly means smart, but quiet about it, not a know-it-all. Not cunning neither, because that's like being crooked, and Glacier's not that way. He's a thinker, and that's good on account of he won't do the stupid thing like getting a hoof caught in a hole or shying away if a bird breaks out of a bush. But it's bad too, because he's not about to do what you say just because you say it. He take his own time to think for himself. Not all jockeys can see why a horse might be that way, so I think that he does on the track always gonna depend on who asks him to do it. You see now? See how his tail swings side to side? He knows how to use himself, but he don't always engage that big hind end when he's in a race. You have to know to ask him just the right way. And then back home in the paddock, he's not one to try to be a boss horse. He don't barge in to get the food so as to rile the others, but he don't go hungry neither. He watch and he think, and when the others commence to fussing for one particular pile of hay, he go off and find one that he can eat by his own self without aggravation. That's Fly. Jarrett took a breath. He wasn't sure he had ever said so many words in a row before, but then no one had ever seemed so ready to hear his opinion. That gives you just a glimpse into Jarrett. And again, this was just as a child, so you can imagine the kind of horseman he grew up to be. Well, Thomas Scott was actually a real painter. He was a real part of the story. And a few years ago, one of his paintings was found on a trash heap. And that actually brings us to the part of the novel that is more modern day. Two characters to know about, both of them fictitious, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure. One of them is Theo. He is an art historian who lives in Washington, D.C., and he found an old painting of a horse on his neighbor's trash heap and is immediately drawn to it. And Jess, who also lives in Washington, D.C., and works for the Smithsonian studying bones. And there's a woman who's going to be visiting from England who is wanting to study a skeleton of an old horse. And Jess has to locate this horse because this skeleton, because it is stowed away in the dark recesses of the Smithsonian where things get shoved. And when this lady comes over and is helping her kind of get these bones out, they're, dusty and kind of a mess. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed, that this horse is like this. And the woman said, and this is when the woman said, oh, this isn't just a horse. This is the horse. And so through Jess's and Theo's common interest in this horse, although she's interested in the bones and he's more interested in these works of art and the history behind them, but their interest in the horse brings them into a friendship. And through their stories, we learn that, well, some things just don't go away. They are just so deeply ingrained. Theo is a Nigerian American, and while he is looking at the racism that was prevalent even in the paintings that he's studying, when you see these slaves standing next to their horses, and he's interested in the influence that slaves in particular had over the racing industry. But he's also confronting the racism that is so prevalent today. He is, I guess, sort of the connection. He's connecting the racism of the past with the racism that we see today. So this is not always an easy book to read because we have to confront the hatred that we so often see and maybe even are a part of. But I would definitely recommend this book. It is such a good book. I had heard of Geraldine Brooks before and have wanted to read her, but I've never read any of her works. But now I will definitely be reading another book or two by Geraldine Brooks. She actually is a Pulitzer Prize winner for her book, March. Anyway, if you're like me and you enjoy reading historical fiction, I encourage you to check out some of the other videos that I have made. I have read some really good books in my quest to read 52 books this year. Tell me, what are some good historical fiction books that you have read? I am always looking for good book recommendations. And if you like this kind of content, I hope that you will consider subscribing. I post a video every Sunday about the book that I have read that week. So until next Sunday, have a great week and keep reading.